Let's continue on with our topic. So we stopped at Mendel's seeds or the Mendelian genetics, wherein we talked about the peas, no? Types of seeds, the characteristics of the seeds, flower color, the pods, and the stem, wherein he discovered that there is 3:1 phenotypic ratio and 1:2 genotypic ratio. Now let's go to autosomal dominant inheritance. In the case of cystic fibrosis, the disorder is recessive to the normal phenotype. However, a genetic abnormality may be dominant to the normal phenotype. When the dominant allele is located on one of the 22 pairs of autosomes, or when we say autosomal, it is the non-sex chromosomes. We refer to its inheritance pattern as autosomal dominant. An example of an autosomal dominant disorder is neurofibromatosis type 1, which is a type of disease that induces tumor formation within the nervous system that leads to skin and skeletal deformities. Consider a couple, halimbawa, in which one parent is heterozygous for um, this nervous disorder or the neurofibromatosis type 1, and who therefore has neurofibromatosis because ano siya, carrier siya. Aside from that, also suffers from the disease. So, as you can see here sa Punnett square, the dominant allele is the big letter N for neurofibromatosis. And ang one parent naman is homozygous for the normal gene, which is wala siya may ginadala nga gene nga neurofibromatosis or the small letter N, which is kung homozygous siya, meaning two small letter N si other parent. The heterozygous parent would have a 50% chance nga mapasa niya ang iya dominant allele for the disorder sa iya nga offspring. And si homozygous parent naman will always pass the normal allele. Therefore, four possible offspring genotype ang magwa. Si there is a corner, si big letter N and small letter N, which is the same man, two pairs of big letter N and small letter N, or what we call the heterozygous trait, and then ang normal trait, which is duwaman. That is, every child of this couple would have a 50% chance of inheriting neurofibromatosis. Ang other genetic diseases that are inherited in this pattern are, for example, achondroplastic dwarfism, or pwede man nga Marfan syndrome and Huntington's diseases. So as you can see here sa illustration, this is what happens when a child suffers from Marfan syndrome and Huntington's disease. Because autosomal dominant disorders are expressed by the presence of biskan one gene lang, an individual with the disorder nga ginadala niya na ang gene will know nga he or she has at least one faulty gene. The expression of the disease may manifest later pa in life after some childbearing years, which is amo na ang case sa Huntington's diseases kung magtigulang na ang individual. Wherein sa bilog yang nga lifetime wala yan na ginsuffer, but pagtigulang niya amo na pagwasang symptoms. So, for autosomal recessive inheritance, kagina dominant subong recessive, When a genetic disorder is inherited sa autosomal recessive pattern, the disorder corresponds to the recessive phenotype. So, for heterozygous individuals, they will not display symptoms of the disorder. Biskan, may ginadala sila nga gene sang disease because their unaffected gene will compensate. Such an individual is called lang carrier. So, pwede nga carrier ka pero wala ka ga-suffer sang disease. Carriers for autosomal recessive disorder may never know their genotype unless they have a child with the disorder. For example, sang autosomal recessive disorder is ang mentioned kagina nga cystic fibrosis, which we introduced sa latter tanga slide. It is characterized sang chronic accumulations sang thick nga mucus sa lungs and sa digestive tract. Decades ago, children with cystic fibrosis rarely live to adulthood. With advances daw sa medical technology naton, the average lifespan in developed countries nag-increase na into middle adulthood. So, those nga may mga cystic fibrosis, they are or it is a relatively common disorder nga nag-occur sa every 1 in 2,000 Caucasians. And ang child that is born to two cystic fibrosis parents, they would have a 25% chance of inheriting the disease. On the other hand naman, a child born to a cystic fibrosis carrier and someone with two unaffected alleles as shown here sa illustration and the Punnett square, it would have a 0% sang probability nga ma-inherit yang cystic fibrosis because we are talking about autosomal recessive inheritance. And pero may chance nga maging carrier. But 0% ang chance niya nga i-suffer yang disease. Other examples ng autosome recessive genetic illnesses, they include mga blood disorder such as sickle cell anemia, also the fatal neurological disorder nga Tay-Sachs disease, and ang metabolic disorder nga phenylketonuria. Example lang sa mga diseases. So let's go sa X-linked dominant or recessive inheritance. Ang X-linked transmission, ang pattern nga ni naga-involve sa genes nga located sa X chromosome of the 23rd pair link. Ano gani ang 23rd pair? Ang sex chromosome. Recall nga ang X is for female and kung may Y chromosome ka, it is for the male. So when a father transmits a Y chromosome, the child is male, and when he transmits an X chromosome, the child is female because si mother always transmits the X chromosome. So nakadepende sa father kung ang matransmit niya nga chromosome is X or Y. So when an abnormal allele for a gene that occurs sa X chromosome is dominant over sa normal allele, ang pattern is described as the X-linked dominant. For example, sa case with vitamin D resistant nga rickets, ang affected nga father would pass the disease gene to all of his daughters, but none of his sons. Kay specific lang siya, that's why X-linked dominant or recessive inheritance. Specific lang siya sa X chromosome. So, kung ang rickets is, arada siya ang gene, sang disease nga na is maka-impon lang siya sa X-link. Therefore, if mapasa ni father ya ang Y chromosome, hindi affected ang offspring nga may Y chromosome. Logically speaking, ang lalaki nga bata. If the mother ang affected sang rickets, all of her children, male or female, would have a 50% chance nga ma-inherit ya ang disorder because ang ginadala ni mother nga chromosome or ang ginapasa nga chromosome is ang X chromosome, which is naga-occur siya both sa male and female offspring. So for an affected female, the inheritance pattern would be identical sa autosomal dominant inheritance pattern, wherein ang one parent is heterozygous and the other is homozygous for the normal gene. For X-linked recessive inheritance, it is much more common because ang females can be carriers of the disease yet they still have a normal phenotype. Ara sa gene nila ang disease but hindi obvious sa ila or wala sila symptoms. So diseases transmitted by X-linked recessive inheritance include, for example, color blindness, blood clotting disorder, nga hemophilia, and mga some forms of muscular dystrophy. So for example, ang X-linked recessive inheritance, we consider parents in which the mother is an affected carrier lang siya, here sa illustration, carrier lang si mother, and then si father here is unaffected or normal. So makita nyo nga none of the daughters would have the disease because they receive a normal gene from their father. However, they have a 50% chance of receiving the disease gene from their mother and becoming a carrier pero unaffected sila. So, pwede nga gadala siya sang gene nga color blindness pero hindi siya color blind. So, muna siya. In contrast naman, 50% of the sons here sa XY chromosome, they would be affected. So, as you can see there, may affected son. And with X-linked recessive diseases, males either have the disease or they are genotypically normal, which means that they cannot be carriers. Females, however, they can be genotypically normal, but they are a carrier nga who is phenotypically normal, or they can be affected with the diseases. So a daughter can inherit the gene for an X-linked recessive illness when her mother is a carrier or affected, or her father is also affected. So the daughter will be affected by the disease only if gin-inherit niya ang X-linked recessive gene from both parents. Kaya kung, for example, may dala siya nga chromosome which is may genes ang disease from the mother pero ang iya father is unaffected, meaning carrier lang siya but not affected. As you can imagine, X-linked recessive disorders affect many more males than females. So for example, again, ang gin-mention ta nga color blindness, they affect at least 1 in every 20 males, but only 1 in 400 females. And we should always remember that not all genetic disorders are inherited in a dominant recessive pattern. May ginatawag man ta nga incomplete dominance, codominance, and lethal alleles. In incomplete dominance, the offspring express a heterozygous phenotype that is intermediate between the parents' homozygous dominant trait and ang other parents' homozygous recessive trait. So, an example of this can be seen sa snapdragons nga plant. When red-flowered plants and white-flowered plants are crossed, nagaproduce sila sang hindi samo nga red and white but pink-flowered plants. Amo na ang ginatawag nga incomplete dominant. So, we can see this in humans, ang incomplete dominance. They might occur with one of the genes, for example, hair texture. So, when one parent passes ang curly hair nga allele, kag nag-incompletely dominant siya nga allele, then ang isa ka parent passes ang straight hair nga allele, ang effect ni sa offspring will be intermediate. resulting in hair that is wavy. So, ang example naman sa codominance, it is characterized by the equal, distinct, and simultaneous expressions sang both parents' different alleles. So, this pattern differs from intermediate or blended features nga makita sa incomplete dominance because, for example, here ang classic example sa codominance is ang ABO blood type sa humans. So, people are, for example, sa blood type na to may kilala kita nga blood type A, blood type B, or blood type AB, or blood type O. So, wala na yan sila nga kung ang mother blood type A and then ang father is blood type B, wala sing blood type C. But people, for example, nga blood type A, if they have an allele for an enzyme that facilitates the production of ang surface antigen A sa ilang erythrocytes, and then ang allele nga ni is designated as, here as you can see here sa table, this one, ang A. In the same manner, if blood type B naman ang gina-express ang enzyme nga for the production ng surface antigen B, amo man ang symbol. Here, blood type B. But people who have alleles for both si mother kag si father, abi nagadala sila sang amo nga allele sang blood, hence ang A kag ang B, so maproduce sila sang both surface antigens for both A and B. And as a result, ang ilang offspring is the effect of both alleles or ang enzyme. We can say that the A and the blood type A and the blood type B, ang allele nila are codominant. So, pwede nga magwa ang bata nila, pwede nga blood type AB. So, there is also a third allele sa blood type. It determines ang gina-produce is non-functional enzyme. So, people who have two nga small letter I, for example, it means they do not produce either A or B. So, ginatawag na siya nga blood type O. So, if a person, halimbawa, has blood type A, and then ang blood type O ng allele, which is, ginapakita siya sa small letter I, ang person will have a blood type A. Kay, since ang gina-showcase sang blood type O is wala siya sang enzyme or non-functional enzyme siya sa either A kag B, so that's why it's blood type O. Actually blood type 0 na siya, but in order nga may continuum, so gin letter naman lang siya, gin blood type O siya. Notice that it does not make any difference no whether a person has two enzyme nga functional sa A and may one sa nga allele nga small letter I, or which is the allele for the blood type O. In both cases, the person is still blood type A. Biskan may ara siya sang recessive allele ni sa nga blood iya sang blood type O. So because ang blood type A ginamask ya ang recessive nga allele nga small letter I, which can only be produced, for example, kung ang father and mother both have ang two recessive alleles nga ni nga small letter I, it means that's the only time nga makaproduce ka sang blood type O. Okay, so muna sang ginatawag nga codominant. Because if ang recessive allele nga ni is maparisyan sa sang either A or B, magwa gid ang A or either B or either AB. So, this summarizes the expression sang blood typing. So, for certain combinations, ginlawag ta kagina ang Tay-Sachs disease. For certain combinations of alleles, they can be lethal, meaning they prevent the individual from developing in utero or they cause a shortened lifespan. So, in recessive lethal inheritance nga pattern, a child who is born to two heterozygous carrier nga parents and nga nag-inherit siya sang faulty allele from both gid nga parent, the offspring would not survive. And an example of this is ang Tay-Sachs, which is a fatal disorder sang nervous system. Sa disorder nga ni, parents with one copy of the allele for the disorder, they are carriers. If they both transmit their abnormal allele, kung duwagid ka parent ang may faulty nga allele nga ginpasa nila sa ila offspring, their offspring will develop the disease and will die in childhood, usually before the age of 5. In dominant lethal inheritance, these pattern are much more rare because wala man sang may ga-occur nga heterozygotes nor homozygotes nga naga-survive. So of course, dominant lethal alleles that arise naturally through mutation and nagakos ang miscarriage or stillbirths, they are never transmit to subsequent generations. Kay, di ba, dito pa lang nga daan, before 5 years old, pwede nga mapatay na sila. So, hindi sila ka-produce ng ila own offspring. However, some dominant lethal alleles such as ang allele for Huntington's disease, they cause a shortened lifespan but they may not be identified until ang person mag-reach sa sang reproductive age siya and magkaroon siya ng children. Huntington's disease, they cause irreversible nerve cell degeneration and death in 100% sang affected individuals. But it may not be expressed until nga mag-reach ang individual sa iyang middle age. Magtigulang na siya. So, in this way, or maging ma-reach na ang iyang reproductive nga years. In this way, dominant lethal alleles can be maintained sa human population kahit nakaproduce ang offspring mo. So, ang offspring niya nga to, siya nga dan carrier na and then napasa niya ang iyang trait. So, these lethal alleles can be maintained sa human population. And individuals nga may family history sa Huntington's diseases, they are typically offered mga genetic counseling, which it can help them decide whether or not they wish to be tested for the faulty gene and dara man sila maka-decide if they would still pursue to have children. So, for mutations naman, a mutation is a change in the sequence ng DNA nucleotides that may or may not affect a person's phenotype. Ang gene siya lang ang nag-ilis or nag-change or nag-mutate, nag-alter, whatever. And mutations can arise spontaneously from errors during DNA replication or they can result from environmental insults man such as, for example, radiation, mga certain viruses, or mga exposure sa, for example, tobacco smoke or other toxic chemicals. And because genes nga gina-encode for assembly sang proteins, kung may magsala dira, ang a mutation in the nucleotide sequence of a gene can change man sang amino acid sequence and kung may nag-change sa amino acid sequence, meaning ma-change man ang protein structure. Kung di ba dire sa human anatomy and physiology, kung ano ang structure, amo na ang function, right? So, if naglain na ang protein structure, meaning malain man ang function. Spontaneous mutations occur during meiosis and are thought to account for many spontaneous abortions or ang ginatawag nga miscarriages. This is our last slide. For our, as you can see here, may duwa ka sets sang karyotypes because it is for chromosomal disorders. So, you will know later kung ano na ang problem sa both karyotype. Sometimes, the genetic diseases is not caused by a gene or a mutation, but by the presence of an incorrect number of chromosomes. So, can you see what I mean by when I told you to look at the two karyotypes. Here ang gincirclean day, kung makita nyo, ang number 21 nga chromosomes is tatlo kabilog, and then here sa dalom, ang number 23 nga chromosome kulang. Okay? So for example, sa Down syndrome, it is caused by having 3 copies of chromosome 21. Ari ang karyotype niya. This is known as trisomy 21. Kay may tatlo siya ka chromosome dira. Kay di ba dapat ano lang, pair, chromosome pair. So yaya tatlo gid. So trisomy 21. The most common cause ng trisomy 21 is ang chromosomal non-disjunction during meiosis, nagsala. The frequency of non-disjunction nga event naga-appear to increase with age, so that ang frequency of bearing a child nga may Down syndrome, it increases in women over age of 36. The age of the father matters less, much more sa woman, sa mother, because non-disjunction is much likely to occur in a sperm than in an egg. And whereas Down syndrome is caused by having 3 copies of a chromosome, ang Turner syndrome naman niya is caused by having just 1 copy of X chromosome. This is known as monosomy. The affected child is always female. Again, the affected child is always female. Kay may isa lang siya ka-copy sang 23rd chromosome niya, and X chromosome lang siya. So women with Turner syndrome, they are sterile also because their sexual organs do not mature. So as makita mo din sa karyotyping, ang chromosome number 23 is missing. Missing siya sang isa ka pair, X chromosome lang. So that's why nga automatically ang offspring nga ma-produce dira is babayi. And carrier, sufferer siya sa nga disease, but hindi siya produce ang iya own offspring. So that's it for the different types of ang non-Mendelian genetics ni Sakay. Ginapakita na di ang exemptions sa 3:1 or sa 1:2:1 ni Gregor Mendel. Amo na yung mga ginatawag ng other inheritance patterns aside from the Mendelian genetics.